And welcome into the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us on a Wednesday morning. Some of you on the East Coast, almost noon there. Appreciate you guys taking some time out and enjoying your lunch with us. Some baseball news here for you early. We got a few headlines from Juan Soto, the Boston Red Sox, the Toronto Blue Jays. We're going to dig into all of those, but first, welcome in. As we've been covering for the past week or so now, Juan Soto is the big fish on the market. Everybody knows that. He's this year's Shohei Ohtani. He's this year's Aaron Judge. He is the free agent that every team is hoping will say yes to them, but we shall see where his sweepstakes goes. Everybody long believed it was going to be a three-horse race between the Yankees, the Mets, and the Dodgers, and absolutely those are the three teams that are in there. But we knew it wasn't going to be limited to just that. Every single time Scott Boras has one of those name clients out there that he wants to try to float out there, he'll also float out some other dark horse teams that might be more active, more aggressive in the market, might be willing to outbid the other suitors that are really trying to vie for his services. This year's case, it turns out to be the Toronto Blue Jays and the Boston Red Sox. Now, don't get me wrong, they could absolutely pony up and, manage to pry him away from one of those three teams. Do I think it's overly likely? No, I don't. I think they are the typical dark horse that we see Scott Boras tried out there every year for a guy like Juan Soto, for a guy like Aaron Judge, for a guy like Shohei Ohtani. That level of free agent, they always try to drum up that price, drum up the interest. And while I'm sure there is interest from the Red Sox and from the Blue Jays, I think we all know it's really going to come down to one of those three teams, the Yankees, the Mets, or the Dodgers, who's going to pony up the money to bring him in. Now, what are you getting in a Juan Soto? A generational talent is obviously the big thing there. He is so young, and that's part of the reason why this contract is going to be so huge. He is such a young player to hit free agency at this level. It's going to be unlike anything we've really seen. We saw a two-way player last year in Shohei Ohtani get that $700 million price tag, but that was with deferred money. With Juan Soto, this is the first real case we've seen of a one-way position player or a pitcher, and just see what the market really is doing in response to that contract from Shohei Ohtani last year. Do the numbers get up to the $500, $600 million range? We'll have to find out. But he is such a young player. I would expect to see a deal in that 10 to 14 year range, maybe in the even the 15-year range, and get up to that $600 million price tag. We saw a few estimates early last week anyway that speculated the Mets could sign him for anywhere around 14 years at $630 million. That is a hefty price tag, and I believe the Mets absolutely could afford it. I mean, we are talking about Steve Cohen here, but for to put that much commitment, if you're another team, say if you're a team just kind of middle of the road trying to manage your budget, like the Red Sox that are trying to rebuild their rotation a little bit, is Juan Soto the guy that you want to sink $45 million a year on before you address the rotation? I'm not entirely sure. So I still think it's a three-team race, really. Yankees, Dodgers, and Mets. And we'll see where he ultimately ends up going. Now, item number 2 is going to be Roque Sasaki coming over from the NPB. A heavy favorite has to be the LA Dodgers. They just won the World Series, just won the World Baseball Classic with his teammates Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto there just a few months back. Got to keep that in mind when you're getting to his free agency. Now, of course, you look at the money that Shohei Ohtani got when he came over. It's going to be a very similar case. It's not going to cost a whole lot to bring in Sasaki because he's going to be at an age that doesn't allow him to reap his full value. It's going to be signing for a minor league deal, and so the money is going to be very small. So you're going to have a team in place that's going to convince him that, hey, even though the money's equal, our team is better placed for him because of X, Y, and Z. There are only a few teams that can really make that case. Obviously, with the Dodgers, personal connection, just won the World Series. Everything seems to be in their favor in the sweepstakes. But every team out there has a chance to sign him. We can obviously rule out some of the teams like Pittsburgh. Those types of teams are never really going to go after him. Miami isn't going to go after him. Houston, I'm sure, would love to dip their toe in the market. I don't think they could. I don't think he would want to go there either. They haven't shown a track record of success with that type of player before. Teams that have shown success with bringing in NPB players or working with international players are where I would look for outside of LA. Teams like the Seattle Mariners have a track record of success with that. Chicago Cubs to a certain extent. The San Diego Padres to a certain extent. And most notably, the Texas Rangers. Yes, the Texas Rangers who are trying to trim budget. They just lost Eovaldi in free agency. He, of course, could still re-sign with them. But again, the money isn't going to be an issue here, and that's the one thing Texas is worried about this offseason, is trying to cut back a little bit on payroll, keep it underneath $221 million. Now, bringing in Sasaki would obviously help them achieve that goal, but why does that make them an attractive spot? Or why are the Texas Rangers an attractive spot for Sasaki? Well, look at their track record. They have brought in previous NPB players and international players in the past. Most notably, Yu Darvish had a great early start to his career and really solidified himself as a major league starter and ace-level pitcher at the time with the Texas Rangers. Now, of course, it's been 10 plus years since that happened. What has changed since then? Obviously, they have a new president of baseball ops, a new GM. All those kinds of things have changed. John Daniels is no longer there. but the investment in international baseball and in that Japanese market has never been greater than it is right now. And they've been connected with Sasaki for, we're talking almost 5-6 years at this point. They've been familiar with his development overseas. They have a whole coaching staff that goes over there and kind of scouts the players that they're interested in and tries to develop a connection with them early on in the process, and just sees what they can get from them. Maybe they have a better insight on what players might be coming over, what they could look like in a Rangers uniform, what their transition to American ball could look like. All of those things are key factors for the Texas Rangers as to why they have a leg up on a lot of teams that go over to the NPB or pretty much anywhere internationally. Their scouting department in that regard is, I would say, second to none. Dodgers have the money and the wherewithal and the name cachet to really keep their farm system going, but they don't necessarily have the scouting department that the Rangers do internationally, and that's where I think they really have a leg up here if they're able to make the case to Sasaki that, hey, even though you have your teammates that you were on the World Baseball Classic with, even though the Dodgers just won the World Series, we just won it the year prior. We have a great foundation. We have a good team that's still got Seager, Simeon on that team. You have a couple of great pitchers on that roster already and young talent coming. This is a team that still is going to claim that they're on the rise, and Sasaki would easily fit into that mix. They, of course, had a successful rookie season for Wyatt Langford. I think some people would argue it wasn't quite as successful as we were hoping at the outset of the season. We saw the power numbers early on really be sapped. I think we're going to see a great sophomore campaign from him, but Evan Carter, who really solidified himself in the postseason run during that World Series run, really didn't play much of a factor at all this past season. He's going to be back next year and hopefully healthy. Back issues, though, you wonder, how effective he's going to be coming back until he's actually on the field. You never really know. Rangers took it cautious with him down the stretch and just said, hey, even though we could probably get you back for the final couple weeks of the season, let's go ahead and pump the brakes, make sure the back's fully healed, play a little bit of winter ball, and just see where we're at coming into spring training. So this team is still going to be able to make the case that they're a team on the rise, and they should be an attractive case for Sasaki to go to. Now, do I think they're the favorite by any stretch of the imagination? I do not. I think this is the Dodgers to win. I would probably put them at a 75% favorite to bring in Sasaki. That's a pretty significant number, especially when you consider all 30 teams are going to have their crack at him. I think the Rangers are probably one of 2 or 3 other teams that could make a legitimate case. I mentioned Seattle. The third one for me is going to be the San Diego Padres. I don't really consider them too big of a threat, though, to the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers are the overwhelming favorite to sign him if he goes to the National League. But Texas and Seattle, I would argue those 2 teams are on the periphery of that conversation looking in. The last one I'll mention is the New York Mets, and that's strictly because of the Senga connection there and because of the owner, Steve Cohen, willing to put his money where the mouth is. If he's willing to get the advertisements and able to line those up for Sasaki, maybe that's something that works out for him. But I would argue he has the same opportunities out there in LA and with a much greater chance of winning another World Series out there in LA. So that's where things are with Sasaki. Let's dig into some of the other rumors that are out there. First one we'll start with is Travis d'Arnaud ultimately signed with the LA Angels. He was declined or had his option declined by the Atlanta Braves. A little bit surprised the Atlanta Braves decided to get rid of their catching tandem there. I thought they were a great 1-2 punch there. And ultimately d'Arnaud goes back with his catching instructor with the LA Angels. Had Ron Washington as well in Atlanta. He finds his way out there to LA. They're going to have a great 1-2 punch at catcher as well with O'Hoppe. And now with d'Arnaud. I think d'Arnaud is going to have more of a defensive tilt when it comes to behind the plate, and O'Hoppe's going to have a little bit of a two-way feel to him. But overall, a great addition for the LA Angels. They've done a nice job bringing in some good veterans to kind of keep this ship afloat while they get their young guys going. Now, as we mentioned a couple of years ago when Ohtani should have been traded and all those kinds of things, organizational malpractice, the Angels have done a nice job at least starting getting the ball rolling down the hill. Started last season bringing in Ron Washington. But this team, we all knew, was not exactly a great one. A lot of their talent went out the door as tried to appease Shohei Ohtani, acquire as much talent as they could to make a one last run at a playoff spot, ultimately falling on their face. And we saw what happened when you just get out of the LA Angels organization. At that time, he goes to the Dodgers and in his first season wins a World Series. So Ohtani was the best player in the world. Saying you're going to improve after losing the best player in the world off of your roster for literally nothing, we knew the Angels were in for a tough season. But I thought Ron Washington was going to be a great steward for that organization, really get him back to fundamental baseball. And we started to see the effects of what Ron Washington can bring. but he can only elevate your ceiling so far. I would argue that you can only raise your floor so far. I love Ron Washington as a coach, great motivator of men, but we're talking about players whose talent level wasn't exactly on the level of Shohei Ohtani, and that's not a knock to them. That's just the reality of the situation. They could easily avoid the errors that they were having in the field. They could easily throw the ball and catch the ball and make solid contact. But when you're talking about a difference maker in the lineup, Ohtani is in a different class. He's in a different class all on his own. So to say that they were going to be better without him, I think was a little bit of a pipe dream from Perry Manassian, their general manager, and Artie Moreno, their owner. Looking at the prospects of this team going forward, I like the pieces they brought in, Hendricks and now d'Arnaud. I would say this is probably a 70-75 win team as it stands right now. To say that they're better than that, they would have to get a significant free agent haul this offseason. We're talking about probably one or two top flight free agents, and I don't think they're going to go to the Angels. Now, if they're willing to blow the doors off of them, sure, maybe they get to that 80-win threshold, but they're not pushing for a playoff spot, and they need to focus on their rebuild. But two really solid pieces here to get their offseason started. I was hoping as a Rangers fan that they would bring in Travis d'Arnaud, 2 years, $12 million, $6 per. That's a great deal. Rangers are looking to pinch some pennies. They needed some improvement after having the worst catcher in all of baseball last year in Jonah Heim. A year after he went to the All-Star game and started for the American League in the All-Star game, his offense just absolutely evaporated this year. You could argue with some injuries, all those kinds of things hindering him at the end of the World Series run and the beginning of this year, and ultimately just never really got it turned around. Now they brought in Carson Kelly. He was a market improvement over what they had been working with in that backup spot. He is a free agent though, so you're left with Jonah Heim and not much left there beyond that at the catcher at the major league level. Travis d'Arnaud I thought would have been a nice addition there. There's not a whole lot of catchers on this year's free agent market. Maybe they revisit the Carson Kelly acquisition and say, hey, we'll bring you back 1 year, $4 million, something like that. Rangers, like I said, are trying to pinch some pennies here. So we'll see what they ultimately decide to do at the catcher spot. They do have some holes in that rotation, and they are looking to improve that lineup. They have roughly $40 million to spend this offseason, so maybe they'll part with some of it to improve that catcher spot. But welcome into the upside. Appreciate you guys hitting that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Really does help us out. But let's check in on some of the other headlines from around the sport. We checked in on the Juan Soto negotiations, Red Sox and Blue Jays being floated out there by Scott Boras as teams that could be in the hunt or looking to be aggressive. We'll focus on the Blue Jays angle since we've already discussed the Juan Soto part. What are the Blue Jays going to be doing this offseason? That's a team I'm looking to kind of declare early on in their offseason as to which direction they're going to go. Are they going to be aggressive and try to build to the team that they already have? Are they going to be aggressive, build to their team that they have, but also scale back on some of their other future commitments that they have? Or are they going to decide to sell here as we get to the winter meetings? I think sell is almost completely off the table. I think they are being aggressive. I believe the part of the report that says that they are trying to be aggressive for Juan Soto, that they are trying to be aggressive, period. I think they realize this is one of the last chances they're going to have before they have to declare themselves a rebuilding situation and then next offseason trade off Bo Bichette. But they don't have to do that this year. They can try to make one last run at it. People are trying to save their jobs out there in Toronto, and making one last run at it in free agency could be the way to go as far as the way they are viewing this offseason. So, trading away a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., would signal kind of a changing of the guard there. I don't think it's overly likely that they move him. I think it's more likely that they try to add to this roster, whether it be a Juan Soto type player, but I do think they're going to try to add and try to make one last run of it with the core that they have right now. Welcome in, John. What's up, bro? The time of year that we see what the Orioles do. Good question. It is that time of year. The Orioles need to figure out what they're going to do with that rotation. Burns is a free agent, but they have other needs that they need to address as well. I would argue that they need a number 1 and 2 starter, and they could also use some bullpen help. They're going to have Bautista coming back. Kimbrel didn't work out last year, but I would argue they need to add one more top-end reliever. It doesn't have to be a closer, but somebody in that 8th, 9th inning role, maybe not a 7th inning guy. I think they need more, of a dominant presence back there in that bullpen, but they absolutely have to get that rotation solved. The injury issues that they had last year, they're going to have some of those guys coming back, absolutely, but you cannot count on any of those guys giving you 150 innings, let alone 200. So I would argue they have to bring back Corbin Burns. If the market gets too high for him, then you're looking at possibly a Max Fried. Then you get into the lower levels of that. I would say lower level with an asterisk. We're still talking about a World Series champion in Nathan Eovaldi. Really like Andrew Heaney. I think he would be great there in Baltimore. Home runs might be a little bit of an issue there for him, though. That'd be the one caveat I would say with him, but the stuff really does play up. And then you get into the lower levels of free agency. Then you're talking about the 1 year, $10 million contract type of players, 2 years, 20, 3 years, 30. The Nick Martinez, the Sean Manaeas, the Luis Severinos of the world. If they're talking about those type of guys as a number 1 or 2 in their rotation, this is a team that's going to take a clear step back. If they bring back a Burns and add one of those guys like an Eovaldi, we're talking about a significant upgrade for that rotation to where they've fallen flat on their face twice now in the postseason because of the issues in their lineup and in the rotation, ultimately not panning out once they got to postseason ball. Bringing in a proven playoff competitor like Nathan Eovaldi might be just what the doctor ordered for Baltimore. Now, we haven't really seen too many headlines connecting Eovaldi there, but solidifying that rotation has to be front of mind for the Orioles. Welcome in, Sub-Zero. What would the Yankees consider going after the White Sox starter Crochet? I mean, what team wouldn't go after him is my question. I think he's a great get for whichever team goes after him. You're going to have to sign him to an extension. It's going to cost significant cash. See a lot of Spencer Jones trades out there. I don't think the Yankees are inclined to move him. I think if they're looking to acquire, some starting pitching, I think there's a lot of it out there on the free agent market. They can try to acquire a number 5 starter. I don't think they need to go out there and get a number 1 or a number 2. I think they need to get out there, get some innings, get some bulk, and then most importantly, add to that bullpen. They're losing Clay Holmes out of the bullpen. They need to address, the back end of that staff. And whether they bring in, Tanner Scott or they go after Carlos Estevez, he's been connected to the Red Sox and Yankees over the last couple of days. But they need to add at least a couple of arms back there, 8th, 9th inning type of guys, to kind of take the edge off of the World Series loss that they had to the Dodgers. Dodgers really, with a down year as far as health is concerned, they still were overwhelmingly more talented than the New York Yankees were. I think the Yankees realized that they got through for what has been what some people would consider a second year in a row where a team in the American League basically got a cakewalk all the way to the World Series. Texas Rangers, people were knocking the World Series. The Rangers won because they didn't go through any real significant stretches, against tough opponents on their way to the World Series. Now, they went through, the Houston Astros, of course. They went through the Baltimore Orioles. They went through the Tampa Bay Rays. But the Rangers got a lot of flack for the road that they went through. The Yankees, however, went through an even weaker road, with the Guardians being one of the last steps all the way to their title, or all the way to the World Series, and ultimately got smacked by the Dodgers. Dodgers are going to be healthier, you would argue, next year. They're going to be better. They're going to add this offseason. They may even steal your second-best player in Juan Soto and add him to an already potent lineup, probably the best lineup in the sport as far as 1 through 3, 1 through 4. And just curious to see, what the Yankees ultimately decide to do to solve those issues and kind of solidify where they are in the pecking order of the American League. We've seen a couple of moves as well. Marlins decided to hire their manager, first base coach from the Dodgers, goes there. They're going to be a team that sells around the deadline. They're going to trade off some pitching. Don't expect them to be very active in free agency, but around the trade deadline, expect to hear a lot of the Marlins starting pitchers coming up in trade discussions. Appreciate you guys joining us. Got 16 of you guys with us. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. I know a lot of you guys on the East Coast are spending your lunch with us. We appreciate it. Let's dig into some trades that we've discussed over the last couple of times we've been on as to what the offseason could look like. We started in the National League West with the Dodgers and Rockies. We're going to continue that discussion today. But I wanted to get into some of the trade possibilities that are going to be out there this hot stove season. What could we see them go for? Starting pitchers. Crochet is out there, of course. But what other players could be available at this year's winter meetings? We're talking about guys like Yandy Diaz. Maybe the Blue Jays do decide to sell and trade off a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Maybe we see a trade for an outfielder. There's a couple of them out there. Luis Robert is one of them that could be moved. Rangers are looking to get off of some of the money on their roster. I'd imagine Leody Taveras has got to be available right now, probably for a middling prospect at this point. He's a good defensive outfielder, don't get me wrong, but at this point the bat really has regressed, really never lived up to the prospect hype, so you might be able to get a borderline top 10 prospect in a team's prospect pool, but you're not going to get a top 5 guy for Leody Taveras. But there are some pieces out there that could be moved. Sub-Zero, I say Soto goes 13 for 60. That's a hefty price tag there. We just talked about the Mets, the speculation being 14 for 630 anyway. It's not too far off of that, so I'm not going to say you're completely off base, but look at the numbers. My goodness. A year after Shohei goes for 700, Juan Soto, a one-way player, goes for 660. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. All right, let's get into some of these trades. We're just going to start at the top anyway, just kind of figure out what you guys are trying to discuss out there. I know a lot of you guys that watch our channel also submit your trades through here just to see what's out there. The two names we mentioned off of the White Sox, Crochet and Rivera, this one's been commented on a few times anyway. This one has both pieces going from the White Sox to the Mets. Could I see that happening? Absolutely. They need some help as far as the offense is concerned. Robert, I think, would help with that. The injury issues there with the flexibility that they have in the outfield won't give them as big of concerns as it would be for other teams acquiring a guy like Rivera. They'd want him in the lineup, 162 times a year. With the Mets anyway, I think they have the ability to handle a lengthy injury absence for a guy like Rivera. And then Garrett Crochet kind of really came on the scene this past year, really overperformed what everybody thought he was going to do. Never really was this type of pitcher until last year. So is this a one-hit wonder? Did he figure things out? Does he have the arm strength to be able to throw 200 innings? Those are all big, important questions to answer before you try acquiring him. Now, he's still a valuable asset. Contract is what it is. You're going to have to negotiate a long-term deal before you get a deal done. Could the Mets get something like this done? I believe they could. I don't think they'll put them together, though. The White Sox are going to want to try to maximize the value. We saw them pull Crochet off of the trade market at the trade deadline because they weren't getting packages that they liked. And I don't imagine they're going to get a package that they like better than what they got at the deadline by putting them together in this type of a deal. I think they'd still try to sell them separately and try to maximize the return on each of those guys. Alrighty. Kind of some small deals here. I like this one here. Giants trade Doval to the Yankees. They do need some bullpen help for a couple of prospects. I love the deal for the Yankees. Giants. Here's what's going to happen with the Giants. They need to acquire some top-end talent this offseason via the free agent pool. They're not necessarily looking to trade it and get rid of some of their top-end prospects. Maybe by taking advantage of the reliever market, how teams are desperate for relief pitching, they move off of a guy like Doval. With that being said, I would argue he's one of their best relief pitchers, if not their very best. And to try to move off of him and say you're trying to compete and win, while his contract isn't exactly high or anything like that, sends mixed messages to the organization and to free agents who might have interest in signing there. So do I think Doval could be moved? No, but it wouldn't strike me as completely out of the realm of possibility if they are unable to lure in a top-flight free agent. Phillies, this is a good one. Phillies are going to be active this winter meetings. They're going to try to shake things up. We've seen twice now them be one of the prohibitive favorites in the National League and ultimately fall on their face. We saw that last year with the Diamondbacks and this past season when they were bounced early in the postseason as well. Phillies just seem to have hit a little bit of a wall. I'm not saying that they don't have the talent that couldn't overcome it eventually, but Dombrowski is not going to sit idly by. Whatever is causing them to lose these games once they get to October, he wants to rectify that immediately, and I would expect them to do some unique things in this year's offseason. Whether it be trading off of their roster guys like Alec Boehm or a Nick Castellanos being the more likely as far as I'm concerned, freeing up some money, allowing them to go into free agency, possibly bring in a top-flight free agent corner infielder or a corner outfielder. Those are all moves that are on the table, and of course they could go for a free agent starter as well. They seem to like going after the free agent starters in free agency. At least one, 2 or 3 type of starter going into the rotation every year seems to be the trend that's going for the Phillies. They could obviously do something like that, but we should see the Phillies be very active in this free agency period. I mean, this trade here has Boehm and Stubbs going to the Yankees in exchange for Peraza, a couple of middling prospects. I don't think this happens at all. I don't think there's any reason for the Phillies to do this. Boehm is a significantly better player than what the Phillies are going to be getting in any one of those pieces combined either. And while I like some of the pieces that you're getting back if you're the Phillies, Boehm is by far the best piece of that deal, and the value you're getting back isn't close. So for me, I would say Boehm's going to stay in Philadelphia. Like I said, Castellanos is the more likely, more money on that contract. Seemed to have a inconsistent fit with the way that roster has been built. And he's a little bit of a bat, so you can move him, I think, a little bit easier than you could some of the other big money contracts on that roster without impacting your roster too much. And then you free up the money that you're giving to Castellanos that you can bring in a top flight free agent. Maybe they enter the Juan Soto sweepstakes if they move off of Castellanos. We saw some of those similar headlines last year if they move off of Castellanos because they go after a top flight free agent. But we'll see what happens this offseason. I think Philly is going to be very active, though. One other team that was in that article we mentioned off the top with the with the Toronto Blue Jays and Juan Soto was the Boston Red Sox. Now, we knew all offseason they were looking to acquire some starting pitching. Looking at some of these trades that y'all are proposing out there, one of the names we could see go there is a guy like Carrot Crochet. A lot of teams out there do have more than one or two arms that they could peddle here at the winter meetings, and I think we're going to see a bevy of trades leading up to the winter meetings as well. Usually, you'll see one or two decent-sized trades in the middle of November, early parts of December before we get to the winter meetings. I think we're going to see more activity this year because teams are being more aggressive than they have been in the past. Angels have already dipped their toe in the market for 2 free agents. Mets like to move quickly in free agency. We've seen in years past them sign as many as 4 free agents before they get to the free agency or get to the winter meetings. And I think we're going to see that as a growing trend. Teams trying to address their issues early in free agency, locking their guy in at their number rather than waiting and trying to get their, the pie in the sky reward down the line and miss out on the sure thing. So I think we're going to see some activity before we get to the winter meetings. Now, does this mean we're going to have a depressed winter meetings as far as transactions? I do not. Every year, everybody says this, though, that we're going to see a bevy of trades. We're going to see a bunch of signings. I think this year we really are in store for that. We're talking about a guy in Scott Boras who had a lot of egg on his face after last year, how things went with Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery. We'll get into his contract situation with the Diamondbacks here shortly. But Boras had a lot of egg on his face after all the pot shots he took from how the negotiations ended up for Montgomery. Montgomery even had some choice words about it. Snell is entering free agency again this offseason. He's going to do well. I would expect somewhere in the $100 million range, 4 years, somewhere in that range for him. He really performed well, especially in the second half of the year, and it looks like he's found a little bit more of a consistent approach and discovered the starting pitcher he wants to be year in and year out without these high highs and low lows year after year after year. I think he's going to find a little bit more consistency after what he did this past season with the Giants, and I think a reunion in San Diego is actually fairly likely. But back to the point of activity at the winter meetings. Because of the moves that happened last year, because of all the naysayers out there for Scott Boras, Boras is going to want to prove him wrong, and he's got so many top-flight free agents that he can do that with. I think he's going to do well for every single one of his clients, don't get me wrong, but Juan Soto especially is his linchpin here. He has the guy on the market that he can go out there and say, hey, you want the best? Meet me at the best, and we're going to see a deal like we haven't seen since the Albert Pujols deals that were announced at the winter meetings all those years ago. I think we could very likely see something like that this offseason at the winter meetings. So I'm going to try to attend those winter meetings this year. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. I will try to do some live broadcasts from the winter meetings and see if we can get an interview or two with some players, some coaches, maybe a GM or two, and just see if we can actually break some news while we are there ourselves, see if we hear anything at the hotel. So should be a lot of fun this winter meetings, and I've already requested off of work, got them approved and everything, so hopefully, if I can get into the hotel, if I can get some credentials, etc., if those are required, I'd love to do something like that, but already started the ball rolling on some of those things for you guys. So make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe, and hopefully we can bring it to you live from the winter meetings. If not, we'll be right here for you, breaking it down live all day long during the winter meetings as well. We're not going to miss a single headline for you. All right, the last headline of the day is the Jordan Montgomery discussion. I know a lot of fans out there are like, Jordan Montgomery, he's not, the top flight free agent. He's not a top trade candidate. Well, look at what he's done in his career. He's won a World Series. He was arguably the best pitcher on a World Series team with the Texas Rangers. Nate Eovaldi was the other one, kind of a 1-2 punch that really got the Texas Rangers that World Series when everybody thought it was going to be Scherzer after they traded for him and DeGrom. I mean, ultimately, it was Eovaldi and Montgomery who got the job done. Now, last year did not go well by any stretch of the imagination. Now, you can blame it on him going through the process with Scott Boras, signing late, pitching at the Boras compound of spring training that ultimately didn't work for him. Whatever you want to blame it on. It just didn't go well in Arizona last year. He's got 1 year left on his deal. Diamondbacks owner has already come out and said this is the worst decision we have ever made as an organization. I cannot believe we did this. This is what I regret most about what we did as an organization, is bringing in Jordan Montgomery. Jordan Montgomery heard every single one of those things, and he's not just going to pass up on his contract just because his owner doesn't like him. His owner's going to find a way to get him off the roster, absolutely. Now, if you're a team looking to acquire Jordan Montgomery, of course, you just saw his performance in the World Series a year ago with the Rangers, but you also saw what happened after that outside of being away from Mike Maddox, the pitching coach, and away from Texas. It did not go well in Arizona. And what were the issues? Could it be just spring training related? But we've seen some of these issues, not necessarily to this extent, but we saw them towards the end of his time there with New York. We saw them for the first part of his time there with St. Louis. And ultimately, his best situations always came with Mike Maddox as his pitching coach. Does that mean it's a one-team race for him? I don't think so, but I think other teams are going to be less likely to take on the salary commitment of a Jordan Montgomery, and so the Diamondbacks are really going to have to eat quite a bit of that deal. Now, are we talking $5 million that they eat, $10 million, $15 million? If you're taking him on the open market right now, Jordan Montgomery's out there. He's a free agent, not a qualifying offer guy. How much would you pay Jordan Montgomery on the market? 1 year, $5 million, 2 years, 10, 2 years, 20. I would argue he's probably between a $5 and a $10 million pitcher because you're unsure of the issues that you're getting with him. Does he correct those issues, or are you sinking that money into him right now? Viewing him through that lens, how much of the money are the Diamondbacks going to have to eat in order for you to be willing to give up something to still pay that amount and take the risk on the performance? So is it a one-team race? I don't think it is, but I think the Rangers have to be considered the heavy favorite. They're very familiar with him. If they can get the Diamondbacks to eat, say, $10, $12 million of that deal, maybe they give him a borderline top 25 guy as far as a prospect. But beyond that, I don't think that there's a real market out there for a guy like Jordan Montgomery. There's not a whole lot of teams clamoring for a guy, fresh off of a 6 ERA season. He did not pitch well, and for the better part of the season was around, a 6 ERA, 5 ERA? He was well above a 4, but in either case, Montgomery never really got his feet settled underneath him. Maybe another year there in Arizona, he picks it up and does well. Maybe they've solved issues behind the scenes, but I don't buy it. After your owner comes out and says things like that, I don't think he's going to be around when spring training hits. And so I would consider the Rangers to be the heavy favorite there. If the Rangers do bring him in, their rotation next year looks a lot better than what it is currently. Right now, they have probably a 1 through 5, 1 through 6 man rotation. You're talking about DeGrom, Gray, Bradford, Rocker, Leiter. I'm sure I'm missing one more in there as well. But that's a pretty good rotation. If you bring in a guy like Montgomery, obviously you have another starter in there to solve some of the issues that they have depth-wise. That was the concern coming into this past season for the Rangers. The depth really showed up, but the injuries never really solved themselves, and the offense really lacked. So they need to spend their money on some hitting, bringing in some offense. That offense was terrible last year. Tavares had a huge step back. Lowe for the first part of the year was terrible. Garcia for the second part of the year was terrible. Heim the entire season was terrible. They need to address that offense, and I think they will. I think they're going to add a corner outfield bat. I think they're going to try to acquire one more piece, possibly a first baseman, improve over Nathaniel Lowe, or add a DH type that can platoon with Lowe at first base and DH when they're not. Josh Smith had a nice first half of the year, really struggled in August and September. They need to address that offense, but to bring in Jordan Montgomery could be just what the doctor ordered if they're not willing to go multiple years on contracts for Eovaldi or Heaney in free agency. It sounds like they would like to bring back one or both of those guys in free agency, but bringing in Montgomery might be the better cost-effective move rather than bringing in a Heaney who's probably going to cost you $2 for $30, or Eovaldi who's probably going to cost you at minimum $2 for $45. So significant money issues out there for the Rangers, but they have $40 million to spend this offseason, and they could add to it by trading off of their Major League roster. Let us know in the comment section what you think, where these teams are going to go this offseason. We appreciate you guys joining us for this morning edition anyway of the MLB Hot Stove Daily. We'll be live with you guys tonight. Hopefully we see some more transactions this evening and get some more updates on some of the markets around your favorite players. Roque Sasaki, Juan Soto. There's a whole bunch of other players out there. Corbin Burns, Max Fried have my interest on the pitching side. On the hitting side, I really like Anthony Santander, but nobody really views him as a difference maker, at least in the market, at least from the public's perspective. But he's going to, wherever he ends up going, think of him as a 80 RBI guy that's going to go in your 5, 6, 7 spot in your lineup and really kind of lengthen out your lineup. And it's not going to cost you anywhere near what a Juan Soto is going to cost you. He could be a very good add for a team that's just looking for one more piece to push them over the top. And then, of course, in the trade market, you have the White Sox guys, but you have more than that, though. You have teams out there like the Rays who are looking to offload some payroll. Brandon Lau could be available. Yandy Diaz could be available. You're looking at the pitching market. Garrett Crochet, some relievers could be out there as well. There's always going to be something going on in Major League Baseball. It's a 365-day sport nowadays. It's not just the 162 games in the regular season plus the postseason. You have to pay attention all year long. Your favorite team could make the thing that pushes them over the top from getting into the postseason versus not by signing a reliever today. So, keep those things in mind when your team brings in, a no-name that you're not familiar with, and then, in 2 months into the season, you're like, oh my gosh, how did anybody miss on this guy? He's got a sub-2 ERA. And we should see some of those interesting transactions this offseason. But we'll be live for you guys again this evening. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.